Hello and welcome to Athens Speakout. Today is May 5th, 2015, Cinco de Mayo. And my guest is David DeWitt. He's a journalist with the Athens News. And today we're going to be discussing the heroin problem on a national level, state level, and a regional level. And so David has written 6 different installments on the use of heroin in Athens County and what a problem it is. And so you may have read that back in the summer of 2014 in the Athens News. And so I'm just going to let David go ahead, and since he wrote those articles, I'm just going to turn the camera over to him and let him start the program.
Thank you, Steve. I guess to begin with, the reason why I wrote the series of articles to begin in the first place was because this has been a growing problem in the state of Ohio and really throughout the nation over the past 15 years. The use of heroin is still a fairly deviant behavior. There's not a lot of people out there using it, but there are more and more than there has been in a long time. And the use is pretty dangerous and pretty addictive, and it impacts a lot of families in other ways other than just the person using. For instance, a lot of the law enforcement people that I talked to noted that property crime, 90% of property crime is associated with the use of drugs or drug addiction. So these are drug addicts who are stealing people's property in order to fund their addiction. There's a lot of reasons why this stuff happens, but since I wrote my series, it's just gotten worse. The latest report that I saw just over the weekend showed that Ohio itself had its most heroin deaths that it's seen just in the last year of reporting, which was 2013, and it's nearly 1,000 people died in that reporting year of heroin overdose. So, and we can start from the beginning if you'd like.
Yeah, David, what surprised me when I read these articles was that, they targeted, the drug dealers have targeted rural areas instead of, in the past, it had been, in the cities and everything like that. And heroin, of course, I'm a great deal older than you, but growing up, it was never, I never heard of anybody in rural Athens or Morgan or Meigs County, being addicted to heroin, and you would think of that, occurring in Chicago or New York or some other major city, but not in rural America.
Right.
So
I grew up in a pretty rural area, Ashtabula County, up in northeast Ohio on the lake there. And that's one of the things that drove me to write about this subject, is that I've seen a lot of friends struggle with addiction, and I've had people close to me pass away because of that struggle. And so I realized that it's really beginning to impact rural populations more. When I looked into it, the reason why that is happening, I thought was pretty interesting. Yeah. Basically, the heroin market for the longest period of time has been controlled by organized crime within inner cities.
Right.
What's happened more in recent years is that drug cartels from Mexico, specifically one cartel called Jalisco, I believe.
Yeah.
They decided that instead of targeting and trying to compete with organized crime in the inner cities and urban areas, they would target the rural areas. Right. Where they would have a ready-made customer base. Right. And they found what they were looking for, and they've been able to dominate that market and really bring heroin into rural areas.
Yeah, it's my understanding and reading about Jalisco that they didn't want to compete with the big drug cartel, and it would, I
Yeah.
mean, because they have a way of eliminating their competition. So they shot for a whole different market, and they found it, and I think they were probably just as surprised as everybody else that the people in rural areas of Iowa or Illinois or Ohio or would get involved with such a drug, which is, I always thought of heroin as an exit drug. I mean, that was the end. You were on your way out when you got hooked on heroin, because you were going to wind up a statistic.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've had I don't know how many in Athens County. Do you have a number?
Updated, not since I did the articles, but the Health Recovery Services deals with hundreds of people every year.
Yeah.
And as far as deaths go, there was a whole article in the series about overdoses and deaths, and
Right.
it can get pretty bad. I mean,
Well,
like
I notice even if you pick up whichever paper you pick up, the Athens News, of course, I guess it doesn't list obituaries, but in the Messenger it does, and you'll see where some 33-year-old or 27-year-old is checked out, and you think, well, was it a car accident, or you have some sort of disease or whatever. You wonder what happens to this person, and you find out later that it was heroin.
Yeah.
It was a drug overdose, and so. Yeah, it's really a serious problem. We had, or Dr. Whaley had interviewed the former sheriff of Athens County on about 3 different occasions, and most of the time that's what he spent talking about was drugs, and that he got the job. Him and his wife would, get to go and to inform the parents of these people that their 21-year-old daughter is OD'd or whatever.
Yeah.
And I, until those interviews took place, I had no idea that heroin was as big a problem in the county as it is. So.
Well, what's happened, where it kind of began, was in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a big push within the medical industry to start using pain as kind of a sixth symptom of well-being. And so pain treatment and medication for pain started becoming prescribed at much drastically higher rates than it had ever been prescribed before. So you have more people taking pain medication. And these pain medications are what they're called prescription opioids, because they're derived from opiates, which is like
I think I read, David, where that these opioids, Merck made, I think it was an article about Merck, and there's over 100 different brand names out there of these drugs, so.
Yeah.
But they got the Oxy.
You have your oxycodone, your OxyContin, your Vicodin, hydrocodone, hydrocodone, Percocet would be a more common name for it, that type of stuff. All these things, these are all pain management medications, but they're also highly addictive. And they're addictive because people can become tolerant to them very rapidly. And so people generate a tolerance to these drugs, and then they need more and more of them to feel the same effects that they were feeling before. And eventually, if they get really addicted to it, they become priced out of being able to afford the prescription opioids. Yeah. And so what happens is that they're physiologically needing this drug, and they can't afford to buy the prescriptions, illegally or legally, and so they turn to a much cheaper alternative that gives them the same high, and that's heroin.
Right. Well, we were talking a little earlier before we come on the air here about a German pharmacist by the name of Friedrich Serturner. I don't know if I got that name correct or not, but in 1804, the same time that Ohio University was founded, he discovered morphine. And morphine is primarily used to treat both acute and chronic severe pain. And it's you correct me if I'm wrong, it's an opioid analgesic drug. And so in 1827, Merck comes along and starts distributing this drug, and then 30 years later, in 1857, they developed the hypodermic syringe. And then that's when it really took off. And I have a note here that morphine is the Greek god of dreams. Evidently, that's what it means. But I'll let you take it from there. But just a little history on the morphine. I wanted to mention too, and I sorry I interrupted you, that when heroin enters the brain, it's converted back into morphine, which binds to molecules on cells known as opioid receptors. And these receptors are located in many areas of the brain and in the body, especially those involved in the perception of pain and in reward. And the opioid receptors are also located in the brainstem, which controls the automatic processes critical for life, such as blood pressure, arousal, and respiration. So now you talked with Sheriff Rodney Smith, and you also talked with Chief of Police Tom Pyle and Dr. Joe Gay with the Health Recovery Services. And they basically were able to tell you what the county's trying to do, and I guess also the OU Chief of Police, what they're trying to do and what they've been able to do in curtailing the amount of heroin that's coming into this county. Now, I mentioned Dr. Joe Gay. He is the doctor who is in charge of treating heroin addicts at the HR program. So I'm just going to let you tell me what you know about, the names I've mentioned.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention, because you went back into the history there a little bit with Merck and morphine, and I just wanted to point out that for a lot of American history, opiates have played an interesting role. You watch westerns or TV shows about the West, you see a lot of people addicted to this little, it's usually a little brown bottle full of liquid, and it's called, what they're referring to as laudanum, and that was an opiate. Wow. That was popular in the 1870s, and you see it in all the movies about Wyatt Earp. His wife was famously a laudanum addict, and
is that right?
And there are many, and this is the same type of thing. And there's also a lot of theories about how opiates have been used, and me and Dr. Whaley touched on this in Afghanistan, the use of opiates in wars and for taking away the morale of opposition troops and whatnot.
That was another thing you mentioned, Afghanistan. Afghanistan's responsible for 87%.
Right.
And Mexico's second. I don't know if it is that other 13% or not, but it is second as far as a producer of heroin. But when I was reading back about Merck, I couldn't believe. Matter of fact, I had to check it more than once. That company was formed in 1668.
Yeah.
1668.
1668. Wow.
And then, like in 1827, they became major. And then they were a major drug distributor legally, a legal drug distributor up until 1917 when World War I broke out. Now, Merck was in Germany. So what happened was the U.S. Army confiscated Merck. And then how it made its way over to, Dr. Whaley would probably know this, how it made its way to the United States and Canada and into Europe, I don't know. But that's what happened to Merck. We put them out of business in 1917, World War I.
And it's important to note that the big change in the late 90s and early 2000s with regard to the prescribing of prescription opioids or prescription opioids came at the lobbying, as a result of the lobbying of big pharmaceutical industry.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I don't think that they were trying to get people addicted to heroin eventually, but I do think that they were trying to sell pills.
Yeah.
And they were trying to find a way to sell more pills
and
make more money. And
there's a pill for everything, they say, so.
And so just to realize that chain of events, I think, is important.
Yeah, it is.
As far as law enforcement side of things, the way that the way that police officers that I talk to talk about it is that you have supply and demand, like any other enterprise or product being sold, I suppose. And so what law enforcement tries to do is focus on the supply side.
Right.
They want to cut off the main large-scale dealers. They want to cripple the supply side. They want to go after the big guys as much as possible and try to stop them from bringing what they are bringing into the county. Demand is the people who are addicted, and it's addiction services that has to deal with the demand side. But what's happened, and not just in Athens County, but also Ohio and really across the nation, is that, since the 1980s, we've had the war on drugs.
Right.
And this has been an effort focused totally on the supply side. And that effort is good in some instances. Others would argue that it has a lot of negative effects in other instances. But what it doesn't do is give any equal amount of recognition toward the addiction treatment that's so important in cutting off the demand side. Because without customers, you can't sell your product. But the supply side law enforcement is funded 10, 20 times larger than addiction treatment. And people who are addicted, small heroin busts, they're usually thrown in prison. They're not given access to basic addiction treatment that might help them recover and not go after the heroin anymore. So there's a big gap between our funding of supply side attacks and demand side attacks. And even Chief Pyle, for instance, was saying to me that you have to, if we really want to tackle this, we have to fund addiction treatment much more than we are now. We have to prioritize it. If you look at state budgets, oftentimes when state budgets are cut, as they have been often for the past 3 budgets, soon to be 4th,
I was reading.
One of the biggest things that's cut is mental health. And the first thing to be cut in mental health is drug addiction treatment. So in a way, we're going in the total opposite direction on that issue.
Yeah, you mentioned the economics of it, the demand and supply and demand, the basic economics. The demand for illegal drugs is inelastic. What I mean by that is, regardless of what the price is of the drug, the abuser is going to acquire it one way or the other. And oftentimes, as what you're talking about, law enforcement and all that, and you mentioned earlier that they will resort to criminal activity, breaking and entering, stealing, that sort of stuff, in order to get money to supply their habits. So,
absolutely. And usually the first thing is that they begin stealing from family members, and that's one of the first indicators to family members that there might be a problem. Then they will start going out beyond that if they get desperate enough, and start doing breaking and entering, burglaries, that type of stuff, maybe even full-scale robberies. But yeah, that's been a recurring theme among law enforcement professionals, is that 90% of all other crime, property crime especially, is caused by
drugs,
the repercussions of addiction.
Exactly. The latest numbers I could get on this, and I realize it's 10 years old, so the number's got to be way higher, but in 2005, the DEA seized $1.4 billion in drug-related trade assets. In other words, cars and houses and boats and whatever they use to conduct business. And $477 million worth of drugs. Well, that sounds like a lot, but the Office of Drug Control policy claims that the total value of drugs sold in the United States is $64 billion a year.
Big business.
And so, I hate to say this about my friends in the DEA, but they have an efficiency rate of less than 1% at intercepting the flow of drugs into and within the United States. Less than 1%.
Wow.
And their budget is in the billions of dollars.
Right.
I know out in Fort Worth, Texas, they have over 100 aircraft, and they've got about 125 DEA pilots. And it just, I was looking at the number of field divisions, and I'm just going to read these off so I don't miss any of them, of where the DEA is located. Number 1, Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Detroit, El Paso, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, Newark, New Jersey, New Orleans, New York, Philadelphia, Phoenix, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, St. Louis. They even have offices in the Caribbean, and of course, headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. They're at Army Navy Drive. They're in Arlington, Virginia. They're across from the Pentagon. So it's not like they aren't trying to, and they employ over 10,000 people, closer to 11,000, with about 5,500 agents. And of course, they operate in cooperation with the North American countries of Canada and Mexico. And something that I found that I didn't know, David. I suspected, but I should have asked our conspiracy theorist, Dane McCarthy, but they used to just, they have these license plate reading systems. Are you familiar with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I've ridden around with them.
Okay,
on those.
But anyway, they have them set up. They've had them for a long time in the states bordering Mexico. They
have them here in Athens as well.
Okay, yeah, but they had them in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Those states, and they're reading license plates, and so then it's kind of discovered, that money was appropriated just for those areas. That they're doing it in New York, they're doing it in New Jersey, and you say they're doing it in Ohio.
They're doing it almost everywhere now, and I've ridden around in the police cars with with these scanners going.
Yeah.
And you can spot them now. If you look at the police cars, any police car around town, really,
Yeah.
mostly sheriff's office vehicles, APD, whatever, on the trunk, you'll see two things
Oh,
that
yeah,
look like
yeah.
big binoculars on
Right.
either side of the trunk. And what these are doing is every time that cruiser passes any other car parked anywhere, not just parked, every other car it passes on the street, these scanners are looking for license plates everywhere they go. And every time they pass a license plate, it takes a picture of it. It shows up on a little computer screen inside the
Yeah.
cruiser.
Wow.
And then it scans that against, the entire Ohio or national database of license plates and looks for, outstanding warrants, outstanding violations, any reason why this driver might need to be pulled over.
Right. Now, what I'm saying is, okay, now that scanner, will it go around and scan both? Okay, let's say you were passing a car that was parked on the right.
Yeah.
It would get that rear plate, of course.
Yeah.
But as it passed the car, would it get the front plate or?
Yeah, it'll get both. It tries to get every single license plate that ever enters its screen
Okay, it'll try
of
to
view.
Yeah.
And it scans it off. If there's some reason, if some notification goes off, then the screen will turn red. It'll notify the officer driving the vehicle, and then likely the officer
Because
will
I know
turn
some
and get
states
stopped.
they don't require front license plates.
Right. Yeah.
And I shouldn't mention it on TV because I don't know who's watching, but
Yeah.
you know here that I don't run front license plates. But I'm not trying to hide anything.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I don't know. I always wondered that when I'm coming down 33 or whatever, and
They've gotten a lot more.
Canadian maple leaf on the front of my vehicle, and
Well, see, it wouldn't scan that. Like, it wouldn't notify that, oh, there's supposed to be a license plate there, but there's not. It would just scan whatever license plate it does pick up.
Right.
Whenever it picks it up. And then
But as I
cross-check
pass on
that.
by, I'm wondering it gets the rear plate. I mean, if they're sitting out
it
on the
would
median
get the
street-
rear plate,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. So you got me covered.
Yeah.
All right.
They'll, I don't think the police really want everyone to know that they have these things, but I don't.
Well,
I don't
there was
personally
an
care about that
article.
because
There
I
was
think
an
that the
article,
public
and
has a
I don't know,
right to
maybe
know.
you wrote it. I don't know. There was an article talking about going to Walmart, and
That was me.
they just drove around Walmart and scanned every license plate in the.
In the parking lot.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, that was me. That was when I was riding around with a sheriff's deputy.
Great.
And he was showing me how it worked. And yeah, he just went up and down every row.
Wow.
And we scanned every single license
Yeah.
plate there. And it goes really rapidly,
Wow.
So it only
if there's
sets,
a warrant out on the driver of that car,
yeah.
then
And he passes it.
Yeah, that's good.
And at that time, when I wrote that article, and geez, that was probably like 3 or 4 years ago now. But at that time, they only had one vehicle with it. Now, I believe it's most police cruisers,
Yeah.
not just in Athens or
yeah,
Athens County, but
I
throughout
noticed them
Ohio.
on
These have been funded federally,
yeah.
and they've
Well,
been.
it's part of Homeland Security is what it is.
Yeah.
A lot of this funding has come from Homeland Security, as far as even down to your townships, I think, in some areas, having, certain types of vehicles, SUVs and all that sort of thing, so that in case of emergency. See, it used to be before, if a fireman would come to your house for some reason, you had a fire or whatever, all he was concerned about was putting out the fire and going back to the firehouse. These guys have been schooled by Homeland Security what to look for, suspicious things.
Certainly.
And so, if you happen to have a meth lab, they're probably going to find it.
And it's not
But,
just station break.
Yeah, we're getting close.
Okay. And it's not just funding for those scanners. A lot of older military equipment.
yeah,
There's a guy named Radley Balco who writes extensively on this issue. And you probably heard the term the militarization of police.
Right, yeah.
Well, what it's referring to is excess military equipment or old military equipment that's being repurposed and given to police stations across America, which is why you see these big tank-looking things
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
during the Palmer Fest or
Right.
whatever it might
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
or in other communities. If you look
Right.
at like what's
Yeah.
happening in Baltimore or anywhere,
Exactly.
You see
Exactly.
these big military equipment, and they look military because they are military.
Right, yeah. Yeah. I'd like to mention that you're watching ACTV Channel 9 in Athens, Ohio. My name is Stephen Antle. This is my guest, David DeWitt, a journalist with the Athens News. And today we're talking about drug abuse, heroin, morphine, and DEA, and some different things. And David has written 6 articles which appeared back in 2014 concerning the use and abuse of drugs in Athens County. And he's interviewed Sheriff Rodney Smith, also Dr. Joe Gay, Police Chief Thomas Pyle, and the OU Police Chief, his name escapes me, but
Andrew Powers.
Okay, Andrew Powers. So he did his job in informing the public of what we're dealing with here in Athens County. So, did you talk much with Dr. Gay as far as the funding for his recovery services, or how's that program work?
Well, it is funded from state resources and also federal resources, and even local offices have donated to them. Like, for instance, Athens County Prosecutor Keller Blackburn led an effort, a fundraising campaign last year to raise, I think it was something like $50,000 between all sorts of different law enforcement agencies to go toward addiction treatment. The prosecutor's office also runs a diversion program.
That is a good thing. It looks like the sheriff's department, the police department, Ohio University, and the county prosecutor, along with the head of the Health and Recovery Service, are making an effort to help the addicts, and that's a good thing, because a lot of places, probably lack the funding to help their citizens, but in Athens County, it looks like they're making a good effort in trying to help maybe eradicate or at least alleviate some of the problems associated with drugs.
They believe in this philosophy called community policing, which is becoming more and more popular across the nation, and it takes more into account the people involved.
Right.
And they recognize the lack of funding for addiction services, but the importance of trying to get the addicts help and put the dealers off the street. That's what they want to do. I think they understand the situation after talking to them extensively.
And I think too, you mentioned something, or I read something about in one of your, and I don't know who you were talking to, that about the poverty rate and the use of drugs kind of go hand in hand. I mean, now you might say, well, Athens County's always been poor. Well, I don't think that's probably been the case, but also, alcohol alcohol's still the biggest problem in Ohio, in the nation for that matter. But do you want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned in one of these articles about the connection between poverty and drug abuse?
Well, yeah, I think it's pretty clear or understandable, kind of common sense to most people, that when people are stuck in poverty, when they don't have hope for a better life necessarily, when they recognize the systemic dilemmas that kind of keep them in that place, where they can't really get out, and
The
there's not a lot of
hopelessness
support,
of
the
the whole
hopelessness.
situation.
I mean,
Yeah.
people turn to mind-altering substances.
Yeah, they
People
want-
like to get faded. When you
They-
can't, when you have no other options and you don't really feel like or that you have the opportunity to engage life and get out there and try to make something
Right.
better for yourself.
They want to alleviate
Kind of throw up your
some
hands
of-
a little
yeah,
bit.
They want to alleviate some of the pain and the depression that goes along with not having the resources or the skills or whatever to, be a part of society. And so, it's like people used to drown their sorrows and depression with alcohol. Now it's common for those same people or types of people to do that with the use of heroin and other illegal drugs.
Yeah. There's significant poverty in Appalachian, Ohio,
Right.
and I did a whole nother series on that the summer before, summer of 2013, and here's an interesting. So one of the biggest problems with confronting all these issues is that you have only so many resources at the state level. And these issues with our current state government and administration are not prioritized at all. But when you have the problems that it's connected, kind of a triangle between the education achievement gap caused by poverty,
Right.
the poverty, the drug addiction and drug abuse, all that stuff is interrelated. It's
Right.
connected.
Right.
And you have these different factions competing for resources against each other instead of being able to
Right.
work together to kind of try to solve the problem holistically. And so instead of coordinating, they're kind of pitted against each other. The people who are advocating for more education funding or more anti-poverty funding
Right.
or better addiction treatment.
Right.
They're all competing for the same pool of money.
Yeah.
And so, and they all get cut in the end.
Yeah. That's the old cause and effect thing. People get hooked on drugs, and it doesn't take long for them to, if they're not already in poverty, it doesn't take them long to reach that low point by, they maybe the relationship in their family, let's say they were married with their wife, so husband gets addicted to heroin or something like that, probably mistreats her, doesn't have any money for anything else, probably going to lose your job, get caught driving, you're going to lose your car, you're going to lose everything. It's just, there's not a heck of a lot of hope for you unless you do seek some sort of treatment that will put you back on the right course. So I hope things are going to start getting a little bit better, but I don't know. What do you think the outlook is right now?
I think we need to change course. I think we have to have, as a nation, an entirely different mindset about the war on drugs than we've had since the 1980s. I don't think there's an old Bill Hicks joke. I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Hicks. He's a comedian from the 1980s. Wasn't ever really big. He's kind of got cult status now. He passed away in the early 90s, but he said, this is when Reagan first launched his war on drugs, he said that if there's a war on drugs, it means that the people on drugs are winning.
That's so true.
But, I mean, it's a joke, but it's decisive.
Right.
And I think that, I think we have to totally relook our outlook. I think we have to focus much more on addiction treatment, just as far as like just the basic drug treatment goes. I mean, addiction treatment should be covered by health insurance plans in a degree that it's not right now.
Right.
Many health insurance plans won't cover it, including Medicare and Medicaid, I believe, don't cover addiction treatment. So that's some stuff. Insurance plans, Medicare and Medicaid, they have to be able to cover addiction treatment. We have to put more resources into addiction treatment. We have to realize that we have the 25% of the world's prison population.
Right.
with what, 5% of the world's total population.
We have more people incarcerated than any other country in the world.
Oh yeah, by far, and a lot of that is for nonviolent drug offenders.
Right.
I think that we need to rethink that. Nonviolent drug offenders, we don't need to be throwing the addicts in prison.
Right.
That will just increase their likelihood for recidivism anyway.
Exactly.
We need to be getting addicts treatment.
Right.
And we need to be putting, violent offenders and big drug cartel people in prison.
I agree.
Another thing about it is I think that we need to just rethink our investment in our communities and our society as a whole. I think we need to be more focused on lifting entire communities up. And trying to really... Johnson launched the war on poverty from Athens County, actually, from the Ohio University campus.
Yeah, he came
in, 1968? By 1973, Richard Nixon had totally undermined and destroyed Johnson's war on poverty. If we're going to have a war on something, I'd say we need another war on poverty.
David mentioned Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon in 1973, July 1973, was the president who started with the Drug Enforcement Agency, and like I said, less than 1%. I don't know. It's certainly not working.
Now, I'm not going to advocate this necessarily, but I do think it's an interesting case study. In the Scandinavian countries, and I'm going to specifically talk about Sweden now.
Sweden, yeah.
Their program for dealing with heroin is that they don't throw addicts in prison. They do provide resources for addiction treatment if people want to stop using.
Yeah.
But for those people who they consider beyond treatment, they have places where they can go to use heroin.
Wow.
So these people go to these clinics and they get their dosage of heroin, whether they're smoking it or being injected with it. But what's happened in Sweden is that they have one of the lowest per capita usage rates of heroin in the world.
Wow. Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is because these people who have to go to these clinics are so frowned upon by society. They're so shamed about it. Yeah. It's such a shameful thing to have to...
Stigma.
There's a stigma to it that nobody wants to be one of these people who have to go to the heroin clinic to get their dose of heroin. Yeah. So they've stigmatized it without using any sort of draconian punishment to do so, which I think is interesting. I don't think it would work in America.
I don't think so.
And it would never work passing that type of policy in America. But it is an interesting case study on the power of on stigmatizing.
Yeah. Pretty much, I think probably Finland and Norway and Denmark probably all have that.
Yeah,
same
it's all
program.
similar systems. Yeah.
So, I was some of the stuff that you wrote down here. I was pretty much the statistics that you have here.
Oh yeah. Do you want to share some of those?
Yeah. Go ahead there if you want to.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can just talk about what I was able to find about from Athens County in Ohio. For instance, all right, age demographics of heroin users from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 2011. A lot of statistics for anything really it's hard to find the most recent year. It usually lags a couple years behind. But so the treatment admissions for heroin in Ohio were mostly for people between the ages of 20 and 29, so it's mostly young people. And if you add in 30 to 34-year-olds, that goes up to almost 71%.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when they first started, discovering these addicts, most of them were 40 or over, weren't they? In years gone in the
Yeah.
past.
Yes.
And then the age just keeps dropping,
It's younger and younger
20s,
people.
now, and
Yeah.
so I thought that was
Yes.
something a little bit different. Now, do you think maybe that those people that, when I say the ones that were in their 40s and older, do you think maybe, you had explained earlier how they got on some sort of like Percocet or Vicodin or something like that?
It'll often start that way.
And then, yeah. But see, people in their 40s and their 50s or whatever, those are the ones that could, maybe they get injuries on the job and are suffering from severe pain, or, car accidents, and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And so they would be taking those drugs, like I said, the Percocet and everything like that, and because of the conditions. Now, these younger people, you think, had been on Vicodin or Percocet or any of those pain relievers? Or did they just, perhaps they were on some other drug and decided to try heroin? Or
Well, I think most of them probably would have started with some sort of prescription opioid. And those aren't uncommon things to see around the college campus or wherever. People like that, they like to take pharmies, is what they call them,
Right.
pharmies, pharmaceuticals.
Right.
More recently, the press has gone to Adderall or Ritalin, Adderall mostly, which is more of an upper, it's a speed, it's a form of
see.
speed. But there's my personal experience in college and seeing, people around and everything, Vicodin, hydrocodone, Percocet, all those are just as common amongst young people to be, handing around between each other. Less common, you'll see the higher doses. I mean, but an Oxycontin is basically just a Percocet 40, So instead of the Perc 10, it's like taking 4 Perc 10s, right? So it's a much higher dosage, and it's much more relatable to the heroin experience.
Right.
So if people start with Percocets, they find out that they like them a little bit, and then they work their way up, and all of a sudden they're taking Oxycontin, and then all of a sudden, why am I paying so much for this?
Okay.
I might as well try smoking a little heroin, and then they smoke it, and then they snort it, and then they inject it.
I got a question for you, David. The heroin that's consumed here in Athens County, is it mostly smoked, or is it needles, or?
Well, it kind of goes through the cycle, like most people will start by smoking it. But a lot of people don't realize that you can smoke, snort, and inject heroin. It usually people who've never done it before usually start with smoking it, and then they work their way up to injection.
That would never happen with me, because I hate needles. There's no way would I ever get that far down the line. But that's.
But I do want to talk about overdoses too.
Okay, we need to.
And why overdoses happen. I reported June 29th of last year that local EMTs, as of that time, had responded to 61 reports of heroin and other drug overdose. Only a percentage of those leads to death, and they've actually armed emergency responders with antidotes now that most of them have that can bring people back. Actually, the EMS chief, when I talked to him about it, talked about how a lot of people get mad when they're brought back with an antidote because it kills their buzz, and they think, they don't think you saved my life. They think, you ruined my buzz, But one of the biggest dangers for overdose and why overdose happens is somebody who has been attempting to recover or is in recovery. You build up tolerance very quickly to opiates. Your body does. So your body needs more and more as you go along.
Okay.
And so when you finally stop taking it, your tolerance goes down again, and you've been off it for a while.
Okay.
But a lot of people don't realize my tolerance has gone down. I can't go back to doing what I had been doing.
Wow.
So they'll try to take a dose of something at the level they were when they were at their most tolerant,
Yeah.
when they're in fact physiologically at their least tolerant,
Right.
and that is what most often causes an overdose. Because then their body can't handle how much they just took, even though it was whatever they took, 3 months ago before they got clean, and then the overdose process will start.
They'll stop breathing, right?
And yeah, that's the other thing about overdoses. It's not like, I think I even led with that. It's not like Pulp Fiction. It's not Mia Wallace.
Yeah.
It's not like the blood coming out of the nose and the foaming at the mouth or anything. It looks like somebody just falling asleep.
Yeah.
And people on these types of drugs tend to be nodding off anyway.
Yeah.
They look constantly tired, like they're nodding off
Right.
anyway. And so it might be hard to spot somebody
Yeah.
who's actually overdosing because it might just look like they're passing out.
Yeah.
But in fact, their heart rate's slowing down, their breathing stops,
Right.
and then when their breathing stops, they stop getting oxygen,
Yeah.
and they pass away.
That's
So that's the big danger with that. And then you just hear terrible stories from EMS crews. Not just people getting mad at them when they were revived. I remember one story about people will often not call emergency responders because somebody's overdosed and they don't want to get arrested for drugs.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I have heard of that. Whereas, because they think, well, they're going to bust me when these EMS shows up.
Right.
Yeah.
And then another thing is, one thing that I heard was they'll drag somebody's unconscious body out onto the sidewalk or into the street and then go run away and hide in the woods while the EMS people come.
Yeah.
To avoid being caught.
Right. Wow.
So it just leads to all these.
Okay. One other question I had for you. Now, most of the heroin users in Athens County are local people, people residing here in the county, I would take it, and not OU students or Hocking College students. So you probably,
I'd
most
say
college
that's fair.
students have enough sense that they don't want to go quite that far with the use of drugs.
The bigger issue on the college campus is so-called party drugs.
Yeah.
So you're talking ecstasy, Adderall, what they call Molly. One of the dangers of Molly is you don't really know what type of chemical compound you're really getting. Molly encompasses a lot of different types of chemical compounds that people might be trying to sell. So it's an MDMA-like substance, but it's not necessarily MDMA. And so that's one of the dangers. I mean, a lot of people, you might be snorting, bath salts or whatever.
Right. I was reading somewhere where when they checked out, the heroin and all that, and meth, they had mentioned meth, the quality of heroin and meth has gone down. So, you might not be getting what you thought you paid for, especially with this methamphetamine, really.
Meth seems to be growing in this area as well. Just anecdotally reading through the police reports, I'm starting to see more and more of that.
Yeah.
It hit a lot of other areas of Ohio before it seemed to come to Athens County, but more and more the past couple of years I'm seeing meth more. So I might do something on that this summer. I'm looking into doing a longer term.
They're even got portable meth labs now, I mean, as far as because they've had car accidents or van accidents or whatever they were making it in, and when they come to check out the highway accident, they discover that they have a meth lab in the vehicle, which and I think even up to Logan, didn't they? In a Walmart parking lot or something, they busted a meth lab.
And they'll find them occasionally. Just they like to do this one solution cook where it's just like one plastic bottle, and then try to mix it all in the same thing.
Yeah.
And so they'll find those, and then they have to call in the whole unit. If they find an actual meth lab, I mean, that's a whole big process because of the chemical contaminants.
Yeah.
They have to bring in the whole team with the whole suits and everything.
Yeah.
And they have to decontaminate everything. So that's a big process. But
So,
that is another growing problem in this area,
Yeah.
methamphetamine.
yeah. So,
And I'm going to report on that soon.
okay, well, that'll be good. That'll be interesting, and perhaps Robert can have you on his show to talk about that sometime.
Yeah.
The problem with drugs and alcohol has been around for a long time, and hopefully, they'll find some avenue to help, at least slow it down. But I don't, I don't know what they can do in the future. You had mentioned that maybe our current administration in the State House they have other priorities other than trying to fund health recovery services. And
Yeah, they've slashed addiction treatment quite a deal. Attorney General Mike DeWitt's done some things, such as the arming of EMS crews with the antidotes and stuff like that.
Now, I did read there, it was in that article where DeWitt was running against Pepper, was that
Yes.
right? For
Yeah, who's
Attorney
now-
General.
Yeah.
And of course, DeWitt, of course, is the Attorney General. But what did he have? What did he have to say? Because you listed Mike DeWitt, and then you had Mr. Pepper listed. What was their viewpoints on the problem of?
Well, they were. DeWitt emphasized his efforts, getting the antidotes available and trying to get, police officers trained on them. Basically, Pepper's view, and Pepper is now the Ohio Democratic Party chair, Pepper's view was that DeWitt's efforts were not sufficient.
I see.
And that he was not helping, he was not helping local authorities
Right.
decide for themselves the best way
Yeah.
to combat the problems, their own problems, and then giving them the resources to do it. So that's what Pepper said he would have done. Pepper lost that election. Now he's the Ohio Democratic Party chair.
Now, on the national level, the Department of Enforcement, Drug Enforcement Agency, they report to the U.S. Attorney General, and then through the Deputy Attorney General, as far as what can be done, on a national level. Now, on a state level, I'm wondering whether or not the DEA operates through the Attorney General, Mike DeWitt's office or not. I don't really know. I would guess that would probably be the case. Now, in those listings of, I know they have some small offices, those listings of those places in the country, Ohio's not mentioned,
anywhere on there. Yeah.
and I'm sure they have something here, but I guess Chicago would be about the closest place
Yeah.
that would, as far as a major division. But anyway, David, we're running out of time here. I want to thank you for coming on to Dr. Robert Whaley's program, Athens Speakout. And I enjoyed the opportunity of talking to you about this subject, and perhaps sometime later, you can come back and talk about the methamphetamine problem. And I'm going to give you a minute to,
Yeah.
wrap
Well, that
this up.
sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that. I appreciated the chance to talk about this, and I guess the important thing is, I would encourage everyone to advocate for, it's individual people's lives, individual families who are being impacted by this most, and every one of those individual families knows how much addiction treatment is important in helping their loved ones, and so I would advocate for them to advocate to our political representatives to push for that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.